morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for being part of this next session. We're honored to have with us James Parker Shield. He is the founder and executive director of the National Native American Hall of Fame. He's from Great Falls, Montana, and has been working the last couple of years to establish this national center. He's preparing now to move to Oklahoma to open it officially. Would you please help me welcome James Parker Shield?
Tansegua. I'm a Little Shell Chippewa from Montana, and Cree, of course. Glad to be among all the Sioux people here. A little nervous, as a Chippewa. The story, with the Hall of Fame, I like to think it's an interesting one, but it's been a journey, and the theme of your conference is appropriate, for doing something like trying to get a Hall of Fame established. You have to be resilient in so many ways, because those of you that are in the nonprofit world, which includes us, know that it's always a challenge. You never have enough money, you never have enough help, and you always have too much work. So you're always under the gun. And so no surprise, I'm under the gun. I got here at 1:30 this morning. Me and my buddy Kenny Ridingbird drove here, and then we got here 1:30. We got 4 hours sleep, got back up. I had to take him to the airport, and then come back and try to stay awake and get ready at the same time. So sorry I'm not dressed more appropriately, but I thought, they're just Indians, that's all right. They know. This is what we wear, on the res. It's like, sweatpants is, the uniform. So anyway, I'll try to operate. This is actually my first PowerPoint, because I'm 71 years old, and always been technology challenged. If it wasn't for my admin assistant and other people around me, I wouldn't even make it through the day. And Bonnie can tell you, because, kudos go out to Hope Mountain, and particularly this conference, because Strengthening the Circle is actually the birthplace of the Hall of Fame. Because all I had was an idea and no money, and imagine trying to start a national organization where you need a lot of support, you need to have real high-powered contacts. And I've spent my whole career in Montana. I lived in Oklahoma when I was younger for a bit, and then I went to DC for a couple of years, where a lot of the people that we actually now have in the Hall of Fame were very inspirational people to me, and it inspired me to actually go back home and go to college, get an education, and try to be like them, to make a difference and fight for the cause. At that time, we called it the cause, the Indian movement. And so the conference itself, Bonnie invited me, and that first time I went, we were in a room like this, and people were getting ready for somebody's workshop or breakout session, and I'm sitting in the middle, and some gal come and sat next to me, and she introduced herself and said that she was from the Noble Foundation, which I'd never heard of, and she said that she was had just moved to Great Falls, and so I thought, oh, okay, it's going to be like a little local nonprofit, whatever, trying to work with our people in Great Falls area. So I told her, I said, I'm from there. I was born and raised. I said, I know where all the Indian programs are at. I said, I know where all the historical sites are at, the cultural sites. I said, give me a call. I said, I'll drive you around my pickup and give you a tour of the area. And so about 2 weeks later, we got together, and So we're in my pickup and we're driving around to different places. I'm saying, well, there's the Indian clinic, you know, and then, oh, here's Indian education program over here. And this is the nationally famous Hill 57, you know, where a lot of Indians, we had our own community. And the last place we ended up in the afternoon was about 30 miles west of Great Falls is the Fort Shaw Indian Boarding School site, which is where my grandpa went to school. And it's also the site where they have a memorial for the Indian girls, 1903 world champion Indian girls basketball team. And I told her all about that, explained the history of Fort Shaw and the girls, how they whipped everybody and went to the World's Fair and beat everybody there. And then when we dedicated the monument, my daughter was one of the dancers that was there celebrating and taking part. And then when we got back in the pickup and we was heading back to Great Falls, she said, well, tell me more about your Hall of Fame. And I told her, I said, well, I said, right now, I said, I just incorporated it. I said, it's just pretty much an idea. And I was lucky enough at that same conference that Bonnie put on, that's Strengthening the Circle, that I met an organization. I actually sat down in the middle of the lunch and kind of was, you know, kind of golly. I just sat down and introduced myself. And it was a Seventh Generation Fund. And they actually gave us our very first grant, $3,300. It was enough to print up my first little brochure and a set of business cards. And the Hall of Fame was off and running. But the conversation with this gal from Novo, I told her more about what I needed to do, and she said, well, what do you think you need to do next? And I said, well, I said, in Indian country, I said, one of the things that I learned a long time ago, I said, is you don't just run out and say you're going to do something, conquer the world. I said, you go ask for people, ask for their support, ask their advice, their input. I said, so I think what I need to do is raise enough money to go to the National Indian Conferences. I said, maybe 4 or 5 of them, like NIEA, AHEC, NCAI, and there was a couple other ones too. And so she said, how much do you think that would cost? And I said, about $10,000, I think. And she said, why don't you submit a request to us for $20,000? And I was off and running, and sure enough, I went to those national conferences and asked for resolutions of support. In fact, AHEC that year was meeting here in Rapid City. All the tribal college presidents were there, and I had to stand up in front of all of them and make a presentation on my idea. Lionel Bordeaux from Sintiglishka was the first one that said, this is something that should have been done a long time ago. And so he made the motion to support it. The president of Dene College down in Navajo was the one that seconded it, and it was unanimous. So then I went to IANTA as well, American Indian Alaska Native Claim Tourism Association. I went to NCI, NIEA, NIA, you know, they all gave us resolutions of support. So then I felt emboldened and strengthened by support, you know, from Indian country, and continued going each year to this conference. And I remember a few years ago, Bonnie asked me to come and put up our display. We had you know, some pop-ups and some expandable displays, and our first group of inductees, and then we were getting ready to do our second induction ceremony. And I held off publicly notifying who was going to be inducted that year until this conference down in Bozeman, and that's when we unveiled the names. And you know, a lot of this, you know, you're so busy working that sometimes you forget you know, the impact you can have. And we were in a room like this, and I'm unveiling the names and, you know, their tribes, where they're from, and the category. And we got to Elizabeth Prodovich she was Tlingit from Alaska, and she's the one that got the first. People think civil rights started with the blacks down in the South. The first civil rights bill actually was in Alaska in 1945. When she got a civil rights bill passed by the state legislature there, basically outlawing discrimination against natives in Alaska. And so when we unveiled her name, there was a gal in the back row who stood up, and she was Tlingit. And she spoke and she started crying. And she gave me a necklace with a bone from their people. So those kind of things, always move me. Those personal connections and stories that we all have. Anyway, let me try to operate this thing here. Like I said, we incorporated in 2016. Novo, of course, was responsible for giving us our first base funding along with Seventh Generation Fund. And we even got a little bit of money from Hope of Mountain, which was greatly appreciated, because when you're just starting out, any money is big money. The other thing too that Hope of Mountain did was, as I'm sure they've done for a lot of organizations, is that hands-on technical support. And I'm sure Bonnie sometimes got a little tired of me calling her, asking her stupid questions, like, what's a W-9? And then our board of directors and I established 4 priority areas for the Hall of Fame. We, of course, hold an annual induction ceremony. The next one is November 5th, down in Oklahoma City. And we also have developed curriculum. It's gone through a couple of phases, and just in September, we just finished a pilot program with 5 different schools in different states, including Riverside Indian Boarding School in Oklahoma, where we had them use it, and then we pre- and post-tested the students, and we also surveyed the students and the teachers about its usability, so we can get feedback to make improvements. But we want to get that curriculum out to schools everywhere, starting with schools that are on reservation, urban areas, schools that have population of Indian students, but ultimately I also want to get it to the white people so we can educate them. Excuse me. We also have done exhibits. We've graduated now from doing the pop-ups and the little expanding displays. On November 5th, we also are unveiling an exhibit that we actually had a professional exhibit person from the museum help us put together, and we'll be ribbon cutting that thing on November 5th. And it's at the First Americans Museum, which is where we're going to be located, and ultimately we'll build our home right there as an addition onto that museum. So we're very proud of the progress we've made, and ultimately our goal is to have our own facility. And so we've made strides toward that, I think, in a few short years. These are some of the images of, this was the very first induction ceremony. This was held, and I purposely held it in Phoenix, Arizona, at the site of the old Phoenix Indian Boarding School, which is now a city park. But they did keep the auditorium and the music building next door, and they renovated both of them. So that's the auditorium there. And in that group of inductees, in the first group, we had Lori Piestawa, the Hopi girl that was killed in action. And it made me very proud that not only did we have male color guard, but we also had a group of female veterans from all over the country called Sisters of Nations. And they called me up and they said they wanted to come and honor Lori. And so they did a great job. And these were some of our first inductees. There's Billy Mills, John Harrington, the astronaut, LaDonna Harris, the Comanche that was a force on Capitol Hill in DC many years ago, and of course Lionel Bordeaux. These are some of the people on stage here. That's Ada Deer, Hattie Kaufman. Remember, she was a national newscaster. This is Willie Frank III, his dad. His dad was Billy Frank Jr., who of course was well known for fighting for Indian fishing rights in Washington State. Was arrested like 60 times. And his son now is chairman of the tribe, and he's actually coming down for our induction ceremony this year. We held our, like I said, the first one in Phoenix, second one in Tulsa, Oklahoma, at the Hard Rock Cafe owned by the Cherokee tribe. And then the third one we held at the First Americans Museum last year in Oklahoma City. We didn't hold one in 20 because of the COVID thing, and that's when we spent a lot of our time developing our curriculum. And we've inducted a number of people. I think we're up to 42 now, and we cover like 16 categories. Education, military, government, law, advocacy, culture, pretty much everything I could think of, you know, except for cooking. We don't have no awards for cooking. This is, we had a board retreat in Albuquerque in 2020. That's another thing we got accomplished. We felt we needed to come together and have a strategic planning session, because a lot of your funders, especially the bigger ones, they like to see that what you're doing comes out of a strategic plan. And so we met there. This is Laura Harris, LaDonna's daughter, who runs the Americans for Indian Opportunity in Albuquerque. This is Pat Gerard. Her father was Forrest Gerard, well-known DC attorney that worked on a lot of important bills, you know, helping to end termination. And so she volunteered to be on our board. Harlan Macasato, he was host of Native America Calling for many years. And then Leslie Logan from upstate New York. She's a writer and a well-known journalist. And of course my board president is Walter Lamar. He's Blackfeet and Wichita, and he's retired FBI special agent. The third one, like I said, we held last year in Oklahoma City. My admin assistant insisted that we had to put this photo in the top of it, and she reminded me that I completely missed it when, you know, we're busy holding this big ceremony and all these people at the dinner, and people are turning around because this young man walked in and wanted to hang out with us, and people were taking pictures with him. And then I never found out till later that he's on this program called Res Dogs, and I said, I never heard of it. That's how you can be so immersed in Indian country that you're actually out of touch with Indian country. But you know, all the young people were just like, they're all buzzing. You know, even my grandson was there. He's like a senior in high school. He was all excited. We had a lot of notable people. This is Richard West, the founding director of the National Museum of American Indians. We inducted him. Emil Noddy, who basically led the Alaska Native Claims fight. This is famous Dave Anderson, you know, the founder of Famous Dave's, you know, entertaining that. This, of course, is Ernie Stevens Jr., but he's accepting the award on behalf of his dad, Ernie Stevens Sr., who actually was my mentor when I was just a teenager. This is Joy Harjo, 3-time poet laureate in the United States, and Senator Ben Nighthorse Campbell. All these luminaries, but the one that actually got the most attention, the most reaction from the crowd, was this elderly woman in a wheelchair from Cheyenne River, you know, Marcella LeBeau. And I get emotional sometimes about some of these people. You know, we have a selection process, and then we also have a matrix, you know, with a scoring system and all that, because we have to be very, you know, very deliberative. We just don't show up as myself and my board in a room and just toss names around and say, what about, hey, my cousin, huh? They took state 3 times. You know, we don't do that. You know, we try to be very, you know, very professional and deliberative about it, and fair, of course. And we have, you know, our criteria and what we look for. And one of the chief concerns I had, and I told my board, I said, I don't want this to be a popularity contest. I don't want us to pick the people that are already known. and famous or well-known for what they did. I said, because there's a lot of people in Indian country that labor in obscurity or near obscurity, and they dedicate their lives to their people, their culture, or in their small way, they're contributing to the bigger fight, for Indian rights nationally. And she was a prime example. And it's interesting how things come to, because people ask me, they say, well, how do we nominate somebody? How do we get somebody, will you guys consider them? I said, call me up, or just come up and hand me a piece of paper. Because my board, they're all, they're national. They're big shots in their own right. And so they have a lot of contacts. So when we first started out, we all said, yeah, okay, how about this one? And everybody had like about 60 names. And of course, some of them are the same. But when it comes to people that aren't well known, a lot of times you just find out by accident. In 2020, when we didn't have our induction ceremony, one of the other things I did was I actually mailed out posters on our education curriculum to Indian schools all over the country. And then I put together a 20-foot long banner of our inductees that we had. And I took it to Washington, D.C., because November was, Indian month. So me and my board chairman are sitting out there by the National Museum on the mall, and we have this 20-foot long banner, and people are coming by and stopping and looking at it and talking to us. And this one elderly Native woman come out, and she was volunteering at the museum, and she was a Sioux from South Dakota, and she had spent her career in D.C. and she retired, so she was volunteering at the museum. And she came over and sat with me, and we were chatting, and she asked me, so how does somebody get in this? And I explained to her. She says, well, I know somebody that you should consider. And I said, who? She said, Marcella LeBeau. And I said, never heard of her. I said, what can you tell me about her? She said, I'll be right back. She went back inside the museum, came out, and in that current issue of the NMAI magazine was an article on Marcella LeBeau. So I read it. I told her, I said, yeah, she's deserving to be considered. And so when we met, and of course as a board and went through our process, she came out on top and was on the list to be inducted. And then when I got a hold of her family, her daughter and her granddaughter, I talked to them on the phone, notified them, sent them the official letter. That's when I found out that she was 102. And I said, will she be able to make it? And they said, yeah, they should. And of course, that was like 6 months before the ceremony. And then during that time, she was kind of getting sick. And so I would stay in touch with them, and they would let me know how she was doing. But she made it down, and she was in a wheelchair and stuff, but she was very, very alert and gave a great speech. And we got a lot of pictures where people were just crowding around her, and talking to her. So she was actually the biggest hit at that ceremony. And our fourth induction ceremony, like I said, is going to be on November 5th in Oklahoma City at the First Americans Museum. We're inducting 9 people. I should have brought my cheat sheet of names. But we have Governor Bill Anatubby, the leader of the Chickasaw Nation, Joanne Shenandoah, the singer. I'm so tired I can't even remember half these names. Yeah. A bunch of good people. Maybe if I take a shot at coffee, I'll remember a couple more names. And we have Marshall McKay, who was chairman of the Yoshadihi Winton Nation in California. Suzanne Harjo, who was a force on the national scene for many years, involved with, she was one of the founding board members of the National Museum of American Indians, and also was a force behind the NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Repatriation Protection Act. Told you I'd remember 2, now I stopped again. But this is the curriculum that I mentioned earlier. You can see some of the images, some of the people that are on there. Wes Studi, Jim Thorpe, you know, N. Scott Momaday, Eloise Cabell, Forrest Gerard, Louise Erdrich, Lucy Covington. Lucy Covington is actually one of my personal favorites. You know, of course, she had passed, so I never got a chance to meet her. But her story to me was, you know, very impactful. You know, she, you know, those of you that remember, you know, and know about the termination area when they were actually trying to get rid of reservations, her reservation, the Colville Reservation in Washington State, was slated to be terminated. And the federal representatives had actually met with their tribal council, and basically they were offering every tribal member $40,000. Now in the 1950s, that's a whole heck of a lot of money. You know, it's probably about almost like $250,000 in today's money. And so the council was in favor of termination. And that's one of the things that struck me, is because a lot of times when it comes to, you know, fighting for Indian rights, it's real black and white. It's us and it's them. But sometimes it's us and us. You know, and so she had the courage to stand up against her own tribal council. And then when she wanted to go testify against termination, they wouldn't give her the money to go to DC. And she was a rancher. And so she would sell a cow. And I always thought if they make a medal out of, you know, for her, you know, one of those commemorative coins, they should have her leading a cow up Capitol Hill, you know, or something. But I thought, now that's commitment, you know, when you're selling your livelihood and your own resources to travel and fight for something that even your own supposed leaders are fighting against you. So that was a powerful woman right there. We have Oren Lyons, Vine Deloria, Mary Golda Ross, who worked at NASA and was part of the space program for many years. She was an engineer. This guy's another fascinating, lesser known, but luckily one of my board members mentioned his name to me, and I said, I never heard of him. His name was Pascal Pula. He was Kiowa from Anadarko, Oklahoma. And he's the most decorated American Indian in the military in history. 42 medals. And he got that many because he fought in World War II, he fought in Korea, and then he retired from the Army, and his son, one of his sons went in to fight in Vietnam, got wounded, and they were calling up another son. And he came out of retirement, re-enlisted, and said, I'm going in my son's place. And he ended up getting killed in Vietnam. Alan Hauser, of course, we always, also his family insists we always add houses, because in Apache it's pronounced Hail Zeus. And my girlfriend's his grandniece, so she's a Hail Zeus, and so she always makes sure to pronounce it right. But he, you know, he's the most famous Indian sculptor, and did the murals in DC in the Interior Department building. And if you go to some of the, like Phoenix and Oklahoma City and stuff like that, these big huge statues, he's the one that did them. You know. And of course, Maria Tallchief, you know, those of us guys that are ballerina fans, we know that Maria Tallchief was America's first prima ballerina, the top ballerina. In fact, a lot of women, I know in my family too, when Christmas rolls around and the Nutcracker Suite is on TV and everybody's oohing and hawing, you know, she was the one that made the Nutcracker famous. Before that, it wasn't known at all. You know, so not only they, but you know, was the top dog in the ballerina world. She also was the first American to perform at the Bolshoi Theater in Moscow. let's see, who else can I brag about? Well, you all know about Eloise Cabell from Montana, Blackfeet, who sued the government over mismanagement of Indian trust funds and won a huge case, probably the biggest settlement in American history. That's where we're gonna be. I don't know, how many of you have been there yet? Nice facility, what, $175 million? Took them about 20 years to build it because they ran out of money at one time. And then the legislature, because it was a combination of money from the feds, the city, the state legislature, some tribes, and there was a little friction back and forth sometimes, so it got stalled. And then they got, the Chickasaws stepped in with the last piece of money, I think it was like $20 million, so they could finish it up. And this is where the induction ceremony takes place. It's this huge glass, like almost like a half dome, but it actually, the framework of it represents the framework of a traditional Wichita dwelling, because where they're located, that area there is the homeland of the Wichita people. And of course, right across the river from downtown Oklahoma City, and it's got major freeways going through, so a lot of traffic. They did 170,000 visitors last year. And these buildings are like concave. This is where I'm moving my office right there. We took over this building, and that's where our exhibit's at, and that's where my office will be. I actually thought about having my admin assistant put on 2 other pictures. Our very first office, which was, we moved out of that one a year ago, and we were in that, for the first few years, and that was part of the St. Vincent de Paul store across the street that they had turned into a homeless shelter. And so when I'd go to my office, I had to walk through these people, and then there was all these donated items all over the place, furniture, mattresses and everything. And then there was a little door over here that would take you to a stairway to a second floor, which is where our office was at. So we've gone from that to this in a few short years. And it wouldn't have been possible without this conference and Hobo Mountain. Thank you. Questions? No, we're not grading. Nay. Eileen, I know you got a question.
How many staff do you have?
Are you guys proud of it? Because it's yours.
How many staff do you have?
I have me, an admin assistant, and a volunteer, and then I have people scattered around the country. It's kind of interesting how that worked out, because I always, when I would run programs before and when I worked, everybody was in the same office. But now with Zoom, I have a woman in San Francisco. My development person is in Albuquerque, and then I have another one down in Oklahoma, and then of course back home in Great Falls. And so that's our team. Oh, and my bookkeeper's on the Flathead Reservation in Arlee, Tina Begay. Yeah.
Is it structured so like inside that you think, is it like, just say for instance, music, that if you walk through there, you see great Indian
Musicians,
artists.
artists. Oh yeah.
Did you see Rumble, by the way?
No, but I know who that is. Link Ray.
What's that?
Link Ray, the musician.
Yeah, the documentary.
No, I haven't seen it, but it's about him. Yeah, the first guy with the
Might have some.
guitar player. Really?
But I just wanted, like
His name has actually come up. If you're talking about this facility,
Yeah,
it's
how you feature the people. And
yeah. This First Americans Museum was built specifically to share the history and culture of the 39 tribes in Oklahoma. They were excited. I actually stumbled into it by accident when they were still constructing it, and we were on the way to Tulsa to hold our ceremony there. I called the director And I told him, I said, would it be possible to, you know, come see the facility, you know? And so he gave me a tour, and at the end of it, he said, you know, he said, we're gonna be building some more space, eventually adding on. He said, I think it'd be a great home for your Hall of Fame. So, just one of those things, I mean, sometimes you think you make things happen, but most of the time it's just meant to be. You know, things come to you, so you get out there and do things and things come back.
This is pretty amazing. It's so awesome to see your dream kind of like come to life.
Yeah.
Is there like anything that you're kind of hoping for next? Is like any other expansions of it in any
Well, the plan is, you know, we're only leasing this part here for a few years, but this part over here is where the museum and us, we've signed a memorandum of agreement to work toward building an addition on where we would have our Hall of Fame, and they would also have some rotating exhibit space that they need, and we are going to go for a congressional appropriation, which is going to be about $25–30 million just to build that addition on. I actually got outvoted by my board because I didn't want us to be there. I mean, I realized, you know, when they were talking about how much traffic they were going to get and exposure and how many visitors, and I told my board, I said, we're not in the tourism business in my mind. I said, we're into the legacy business. It's kind of a sacred thing. We're the keepers of each of those people's stories and their contributions to Indian country. I said, so it really doesn't make any difference to me how many people come through the door. I said, because we're developing curriculum about these people who want to get into schools. I said, people can get on a website. I said, there's so many ways that they can actually learn more about these people if we just put the material together. So I wanted to, in my naive sort of way, I wanted to do two things at once. I wanted to have the Hall of Fame, but I also wanted us to kind of be a walking example, you know, like basically doing what you say you're going to do. I wanted to build it in a depressed Indian community. And if you ask people in Oklahoma, that's Anadarko. And it's got 7 tribes around that area there. You know, the Wichitas, and Kiowas, and Comanches, and Apaches, Caddos, Delawares. And when I went down there, just driving through there, it reminded me of so many other, you know, Indian communities that you just, you know, you could just see that there was no economic growth, and that to me kind of spreads to the community about how they feel about themselves. And at one time, Anadarko did have something going for itself, because it's ironic, when you drive down there, they proclaim themselves the Indian capital of the nation. You know, Indian City, USA. And they used to have like some big tourist attraction with different dwellings from the different tribes around that area, and tourists would come. And then that eventually went out of style, and it closed down, and so there's none of that anymore. But they, you know, they do have things like, you know, there's an area office there, there's the Indian Health Service Clinic, you know, they have a Southwestern Indian Museum. But I thought that we could come in and kind of be, you know, kind of an uplifting force. But you know, after a lot of deliberation and meetings with a lot of different people, you know, my board voted in favor of, you know, it would have been preferable to have a standalone sort of facility, but they couldn't get over the fact that so many people would come here, and it's it's a beautiful facility. It's great. So I guess it's better to be a small part of something bigger than out in the boonies where you think you're big and you're not. So we'll see how it works out. But that's our idea for the next step, you know. And of course, I still have this dream of getting our curriculum into schools everywhere. I did a presentation along with our curriculum developer, who's in Phoenix. she's Standing Rock Sioux. We did a presentation in front of, via Zoom, in front of 90 boarding schools and tribally controlled schools. And then from there, I was able to arrange a meeting with the director of the BIE, the Bureau of Indian Education, and he liked it. And then from there, I went to DC back in May and had a meeting with the director of the National Museum of American Indians, who just so happens to be married to my board chairman. and she's a Pueblo from New Mexico. But their education person, they have their own curriculum called 360 Knowledge, but we presented to their curriculum director, and she was very impressed and wants us to come back and do it as a group with her staff. So we got some promise there. Other questions? Yeah.
With regards to your facility, you ever think about expanding to like different parts of the region?
Yeah, actually I have. I actually thought about having regional museums, because I thought there's no way most natives are ever going to make it down there. And that was why, one of the reasons why I started off kind of trying to rotate our ceremonies. But that got to be a little bit difficult too. Like when I went to Tulsa, I thought, okay, well, let's hold it at an Indian casino hotel. Well, big mistake, because one of the things that we do, in addition to having the ceremony, is when the inductees arrive the day before, because we have a welcome dinner for them, is we schedule filmed interviews, and we ask them questions. And I specifically have younger people in mind with these questions, because I ask them things like, well, how well did you do in school? Did you ever flunk a grade? You know, did you ever drop out? You know, what kind of obstacles did you have to overcome? You know, did you ever face racism? You know, what challenges did you have? Did you have any failures in your career? Because I wanted younger people to understand that you fall down, you get up, you fall down, you get up, or you start off on the wrong road. You can always change, get on the red road, as they call it. Yeah. And so we asked those kind of questions. So in our exhibit that we're unveiling on November 5th, not only do we have printed information and murals and all that, but we also have these especially constructed stands that they made for us with video screens where you can click on different inductees and you'll see their interviews. And you know, some of them are pretty good. And then you know, I think the one thing that I always tried to keep in mind too is that, you know, I don't try to preach without having been there. So at I think our second induction ceremony, you know, I come out at the end, you know, after the whole thing's done, and they introduce me, and I come out to say thanks for coming and appreciate all the sponsors and support. But I also tell them, you know, I share with them, you know, my life story, you know, of my parents on Skid Row throwing me and my brother and sister away when I was 5 years old, and they never came back. We ended up bouncing around the system, foster homes, end up in an orphanage, in a state orphanage in Montana, get kicked out of school after my freshman year in high school. I never went back, and then went to Kicking Horse Job Corps, first Indian Job Corps up on the Flathead Reservation. And the only reason I lasted that long there is because I had a boxing club, and I was a little runt, so I had to fight my way onto the boxing club. I had to fight two of their boxers before they would even say, I guess you'll do. And so you come out of that kind of environment, and you have a chip on your shoulder, you have an attitude. Nobody wants you, nobody likes you, and you don't even like yourself, you don't care. And so you become destructive. So I became a little criminal. And so when I went back home to Great Falls, I ran the streets at night. And I'd sleep on relatives' couches during the day, or climb in the back of a car behind a bar. And just steal what I could get my hands on, cars, you know, burglarize places. So no big surprise, I was like in and out of jail. And And then eventually, by the time I was 17 years old, I was in prison. And that's where I read about Alcatraz. Yeah. So that was kind of like my, my shining moment to a certain degree. Kind of lit a spark there, and I thought, oh, yeah, I wish I was out. Well, I'd be there, And then I decided I better just get out of Montana because there's always warrants coming out on me, and I just got done doing a 60-day stretch, and it was February, about 20 below zero, and I ran down to my grandma's house because I heard there was another warrant coming. And so I went down there and got my little tin suitcase from my brother, threw a couple of clothes in there, and I hitchhiked. And I just thought any place warm, so I ended up climbing off a semi-truck in downtown Oklahoma City, slept in the streets for the first few days, went around asking for swamping jobs in bars or dishwashing in cafes, and just trying to survive. And then I met some Kiowas and some Comanches, became friends with them, and learned how to 49 pretty good. And played a lot of basketball. And so then I ended up tagging along with a couple of them, and that's how I ended up in D.C. Because they were going there to visit a relative, and I just ended up staying there for a couple of years and hanging around, and I'd do like little gopher work at NCI, like licking envelopes. And there was this one guy that he was like one of the top dogs at the BIA. His name was Ernie Stevens Sr. And of course now he's in the Hall of Fame. I didn't know how big of a big shot he was until after I went back home. But he would encourage me, and there was a couple other young guys I was running around with, and yeah, guys, stop by. And I was the only one that was ignorant enough to just stop by his office. And like I was telling Eileen earlier, I said, I never, or Karen too, Karen Duchesneau, because I knew Frank and Karen back in D.C. I didn't know you were supposed to make appointments. That's what, I was just like a total hick, And in fact, I remember one time I walked in the BIA to their education office, and the woman there asked me what I wanted, and I said, I took a bus up to Boston. I said, I always wanted to visit Harvard, because even though I was always in trouble when I was young, and even in school, I was always a bookworm, I got socially promoted every grade. I never passed a grade ever. They would flunk me, but then they'd socially promote me to keep you up with your age group. But I loved books. They were my escape. And so they would let me sit in the back of the room, and I'd have a book. But I got my education because I could hear what the teacher was saying, so I learned. But I'd read all these books, And so I remember reading about this fantasy place called Harvard University. And so I took a bus up there, walked around campus, went in the admissions office, got their brochures, then went back down to D.C., went to the BIA, and told them I wanted to go to school there. And I remember the assistant director of the education department came out because he was curious about this kid, and he took me in his office, and I told him what I wanted to do, and he kind of chuckled. He was trying not to insult me, so he did not laugh out loud, but he was kind of chuckling to himself, and he said, where are you from? I said, back in Montana. He said, really? I said, yeah. So I said, I grew up most of the time on Rocky Boy Reservation. And I said, and then the orphanage. And I said, I'd like to go to Harvard. And he said, where'd you graduate from? I said, I don't. I said, but I got a GED and a Job Corps. And another smile. And then he said, do you know how much it costs to put just one student through Harvard University? I said, no. And I think at that time it was like $17,000. This was early 70s. And he said, we can put 5 or 6 students to other universities for that same amount of money. I said, oh. I said, so Harvard's out then? He said, yeah. I said, how about a job? And he said, well, what can you do? He said, what's your experience? I said, I've worked on ranches stacking hay and building fence. He said, that's it? And I said, well, I washed dishes in the orphanage, in the kitchen. That was it. So, but he took me and called a friend of his And she came over and he said, this guy's living on the streets here. So I ended up staying with her brother, but I was fascinated by the fact that these were Indians in Washington D.C. that were wearing suits and ties, and they were professionals and very educated, very smart, and more importantly to me, they were fighting for Indians, because at that point, back home in Great Falls, nobody graduated from high school, and you were lucky if you found a waitress. That was be the highest position in our society in Great Falls, Montana, was a waitress at a local cafe, if you were lucky. And to go someplace like DC and see those kind of people was very inspiring. And so that's when I decided, you know, being around those kind of people and being mentored by Ernie Stevens Sr., I thought, I'm gonna go back home and I'm gonna straighten up, quit getting in trouble, and I'm gonna go get me a college education. And I did, and eventually I became the first Indian to work in the governor's office on the governor's executive staff in Montana, and later on worked on a congressman's staff. Of course, served on my tribal council 5 times. I got all the scars. You know, there's some dancers, and then there's people, tribal council members. All kinds of scars, but you know, it's been a journey, and I thought I was retired a few years ago, but I got bored real fast and found out that living on Social Security is not any fun. And so I thought, if I come out of retirement, what did I always want to do, ideas I've had, and I thought, that's the thing. You know, I still think there should be a Hall of Fame, and so far nobody's done it. But I think that people like I met in DC, some of the ones I met in Oklahoma, all these heroes of people that I either got to know or read about, that had made our lives as natives a lot better, they deserve to be remembered. And so that's why I started the Hall of Fame. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. So, James, I so appreciate that you made this trip en route. I know it was a journey, but I always appreciate it.
Who wants to be my shotgun driver to go to Oklahoma? See that
Right there.
museum?
So next up, we want to invite you to take a leisurely drive out. We're going back to Crazy Horse. If you didn't go through Mount Rushmore yesterday, it's gorgeous.